Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere decadent, candlelit, and, depending on how you sit, politically dangerous. We're reclining into the oddly specific world of ancient Roman dinner parties. You're wrapped in linen, stepping over mosaic floors, guided by the scent of roast lamb, garlic, and a suspicious amount of fermented fish sauce. There's wine waiting, music playing softly in the atrium, and, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this dinner if you sit too confidently on the wrong couch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just been invited to a Roman cena, the kind of elite dinner party that starts as a meal and ends as social theater. You're not expected to arrive early. In fact, punctuality is borderline suspicious. The perfect time to show up is just as the couches begin to fill, but before the wine server has made their second round. As you enter the triclinium, the Roman dining room, you're immediately assessed. No one says anything, but all eyes flick toward your footwear, your tunic, and the subtle creases in your toga. The couch you're assigned to says everything about you. There are 3: lectus imus, low; medius, middle; and summus, high. Each couch holds 3 people, and your position on that couch tells everyone where you sit in the social pecking order, literally and metaphorically. You, my friend, are lucky enough to be placed on the lectus medius, the middle couch, in the central spot. It's a prime position, not quite the guest of honor, but respected enough to be in the host's direct line of conversation. The lectus summus is typically reserved for more senior or distant guests. And the lectus imus? Let's just say you don't want to end up there unless you're delivering something, but there's more to this than just furniture. You don't sit, you recline, elbow on cushion, legs stretched behind you, sandals respectfully set aside. Reclining while dining wasn't just about comfort, it was an art and a statement. Only citizens with sufficient status got to lean. Women, unless they were high-born and bold, typically sat upright. Clients, those dependent on their patrons, didn't dare recline unless invited. Now you're awkwardly shifting on a feather-stuffed cushion, trying not to spill your dignity all over the floor. Reclining looks glamorous until your shoulder cramps or your foot goes numb. But you don't complain, because everyone's watching. A bad recliner is like a bad dancer, painfully obvious, especially under torchlight. Historians still argue whether these seating customs were rigid rules or flexible social guidelines. Some believe there were occasional exceptions, especially during smaller or family-style meals. Others argue that every detail, down to the angle of your recline, was a performance of identity, wealth, and breeding. As you ease into your spot, the room starts to buzz. The clink of bronze plates, the rustle of silk tunics, the barely concealed whispers of who didn't make the guest list. These aren't just people. These are senators, poets, generals, ambitious cousins, and one very enthusiastic flute player in the corner. He's been warming up since before sunset and hasn't blinked once. At the center of it all stands the host, robed in dignity, probably smug. Hosting a cena wasn't just about feeding guests. It was a chance to elevate one's prestige. Who you invited mattered, who reclined where mattered more, and if you, the guest, happened to say something particularly clever or philosophical while balancing grapes in your hand, well, you just might get bumped to a better couch next time. Of course, this careful seating system had loopholes. There's the acubitum, an occasional fourth couch reserved for overflow or bonus guests. Often positioned near the entrance, it was polite, but not quite prestigious. Think of it like being invited to a wedding reception and placed at the table next to the restrooms. Even worse, the dreaded tripod stool, small, backless, humiliating. If you're seated there, you're either an uninvited poet, a last-minute philosopher, or a poor relation hoping to charm your way into leftovers. Now, the first platters begin to arrive, but you can't touch them yet, not until the libation has been poured and the gustatio officially begins. That's the starter course, and yes, it often includes eggs. Why? Because the phrase ab ovo usque ad mala, from the egg to the apples, meant from start to finish. But we'll get to the food later. For now, you lean, you smile, you try not to sneeze into the perfumed air wafting from the central incense burner. A slave moves quietly by your side, offering a delicate cloth dipped in rosewater to wipe your hands. You haven't touched anything yet, but hey, presentation is everything. And as you tilt your head just right and catch the glow of the lamps dancing on golden goblets, you realize something quietly magical. This isn't just dinner, it's choreography. 1 part banquet, 2 parts performance, and a generous dash of reputation management. The first course is finally served, and you're beginning to understand that Roman cuisine doesn't follow what you'd call standard appetizer logic. There's no breadbasket or small salad. Instead, the gustatio arrives, literally the tasting course, and it's not for the faint of palate. You glance down at your silver plate. There are boiled eggs. Yes, Romans loved starting meals with eggs, but alongside them sits a curious dish. Stewed peacock tongue. Beside that, tiny pancakes flavored with honey and poppy seeds and, wait, is that a stuffed dormouse? Yes, it is, and it's been carefully roasted, filled with minced meat and herbs, then sewn shut like a tiny edible pillow. You raise your eyebrows just slightly, trying not to look surprised, because nothing betrays a lack of breeding like gaping at a rodent wrapped in seasoning. Dining in Rome was a performative act, especially during the cena. The food wasn't just for nourishment, it was for admiration, conversation, gossip, and mild alarm. Some dishes were meant to impress, others to amuse. Hedgehog cooked in clay was one of those fringe delicacies. The outer layer cracked dramatically at the table, revealing a prickly, slightly nutty meat underneath. You look around. No hedgehog tonight. Lucky you. But you do see eel pie, coiled, slightly glistening, and smelling faintly of seaweed and regret. Historians still argue whether the more extreme delicacies were commonly served or reserved for the absurdly wealthy and bored. Was hedgehog the Roman equivalent of foie gras, or more of a culinary dare, like ordering ghost pepper wings at a party you're not emotionally prepared for? You reach for the egg. It's warm, soft, perfectly boiled, simple, comforting. You savor it slowly, while listening to the guest beside you lament that the honey cakes are less floral than usual. You nod as if this is a thing you too have thought often. The second course begins not with ceremony, but with steam. Platters arrive. They smell of lamb, fish, and heavily spiced lentils. You're still reclined, of course, and trying not to drip sauce on your toga. Napkins, or mapai, are offered, but it's considered rude to wipe your hands too often, as if admitting the food is messy. One of the servers, barefoot, silent, places a dish in front of you. It's a slice of roast pork, crusted with mustard seeds and served with dates. Sweet and savory, hot and sticky. The Romans loved contrast on their plates. Texture, temperature, flavor. It keeps you alert, even as the candles lull you into a light food haze. You lean toward the conversation around the table. Someone is debating whether Greek or Roman olives are superior. A man across the room makes a dramatic gesture with his spoon and declares, "Carthaginian figs are overrated." His neighbor snorts into his wine. There's an etiquette to how you eat, of course. No forks. You use your fingers and the occasional spoon. Bread is used to scoop and dip, but be careful not to drop crumbs. A good guest eats cleanly and does not attract pigeons, which have, on occasion, wandered in through open garden doors. The third course appears before you're finished chewing. Timing isn't exact. The dishes arrive as they're ready, and the table changes with them. Now there's boiled ostrich egg, pickled sow's udder, and a surprisingly comforting lentil stew laced with coriander. You glance toward the host. He's laughing. His goblet is already half empty. You smile and take another bite. Beneath the extravagance, there's a rhythm forming. You're reclining more easily now. The flavors, strange at first, are growing familiar. There's something oddly comforting about the repetition of excess. Dessert, or secundae mensae, doesn't arrive with fanfare but with subtle sweetness. Bowls of figs, dates, almonds glazed with honey. Occasionally, a sculpted pastry arrives, a peacock-shaped tart, a miniature temple of sponge cake. Tonight, it's candied rose petals and apples soaked in wine. You take a bite of the apple. It's cool, soft, strangely tangy, a little too fermented. You keep chewing anyway, and then, just as your belly begins to surrender, a plate of cheese appears. Romans didn't end on sugar alone. They liked a savory farewell, a reminder, perhaps, that indulgence must be balanced with reality. The flavors linger. You recline a little deeper. The couch creaks gently beneath you. Someone hiccups 3 cushions away. Someone else is explaining that coriander aids digestion. You wonder for a moment if anyone here really cares, or if they're just repeating what their uncle's physician told them after a particularly bad clam. A whisper of citrus scent floats from a bowl of oranges. You don't remember oranges being on the table, but that's part of the magic. Roman dinners aren't linear. They loop, they surprise, they never quite tell you when they're done. One last bite, a honey-soaked biscuit that crumbles in your fingers. You're full, but the night is far from over. Your cup is refilled before you even notice it's empty. The wine is dark, fragrant, diluted just enough to take the edge off without tipping you into oblivion. At least not yet. Roman wine wasn't typically drunk straight. It was cut with water, sometimes seawater, sometimes herbs, sometimes things you don't ask about. Tonight, it's mellow with a hint of resin and something vaguely floral. Maybe lavender. Or maybe that's just the candle smoke swirling near your face. Here's the thing about Roman dinner parties. Wine wasn't optional, it was expected. But drinking too quickly or too slowly could be a social landmine. Pace yourself wrong, and you're either a bore or a fool. And trust us, no one wants to be either in front of a senator's wife who writes poetry about people she doesn't like. The host raises his cup, and everyone follows. The evening's symposium, the drinking session, is beginning. Now, this isn't some frat house free-for-all. There are rules, rhythms, and real consequences to messing it up. A magister bibendi is appointed, the master of the wine. It might be the host, but often it's a chosen guest, someone witty or dangerous or both. He controls the wine ratio, the topics of discussion, and sometimes even who gets to speak. It's like being a DJ, but for conversation and intoxication. Tonight's magister is a charming man with too many rings and an oddly specific story about sheep migration. He decrees a 3-to-1 water-to-wine mix. Reasonable, tame, but he's got a mischievous glint. That ratio won't last long. You swirl your cup. It's made of fine glass from Alexandria, transparent, delicate, a luxury item. Most others are drinking from bronze or clay. You try not to feel smug or nervous. Drinking games begin, nothing rowdy yet. A servant passes around crotalum tiny clappers to signal a round of cotabos. Players fling wine dregs at a target with an arcing flick of the wrist. It's harder than it looks. You give it a go. Your aim? Decent. Your sleeve? Sticky. Historians still argue whether cotabos was widely played in Rome or more of a Hellenistic import that never quite caught on. Either way, tonight it's in fashion. The more elegantly you fling your dregs, the more seductive you appear. At least, that's what the flute girl whispers as she refills your plate with dried figs. There's laughter from the far couch. Someone just attempted a pun in Latin and Greek at the same time. No one's quite sure what it meant, but they're applauding anyway. The wine flows. So do the anecdotes. Everyone's voice has gone up a half octave, and you're hearing more slurred quotes from Virgil than you'd expect at a polite gathering. A man 3 couches down is arguing that Caesar invented the olive press. Someone else is reciting dirty couplets from Catullus. You nod like you understand every word. Now comes the real challenge, maintaining balance. You're reclining. Your cup is full, and you've just been asked your opinion on Stoicism versus Epicureanism. This isn't small talk. This is verbal combat, lightly disguised as philosophy. You smile. You answer diplomatically. You quote Seneca, misattribute it to Cicero, and somehow charm your way into more candied almonds. Well done. But beware, not everyone here plays fair. Some guests are conversational predators. They bait you with innocent questions. What do you think of fate? And then pounce when your answer reveals ignorance or worse, self-reflection. There's also the danger of overpouring, not just wine, but attention. Too much laughing at one host's joke? You're a sycophant. Too little? You're disrespectful. The trick is a gentle chuckle and a slow sip. Repeat as needed. Then there's the vomitorium myth. You glance around the room. No one is rushing to vomit between courses. That's not what a vomitorium is. Despite popular lore, it was an architectural term, an exit passage in amphitheaters to let crowds flow out quickly. No one had a designated room for purging mid-feast. Well, probably no one. Some elite Romans may have excused themselves discreetly, but it wasn't exactly encouraged. The food was too expensive and the cushions too white. Still, you feel the pressure. The wine is warming your cheeks, the food is settling in layers, and the room is beginning to sway like a very polite ship. You shift your elbow, adjust your cushion. Hope no one notices that you've stopped drinking quite as fast. A servant appears with water. You nod gratefully. Hydration is the real flex tonight. The host calls for a toast. Everyone raises their cups. You murmur along. The Latin sounds beautiful, but you're mostly hoping it means, may we all survive the eel pie. You're in that golden zone now, slightly full, gently tipsy, and warm enough to forgive the man next to you for saying that Plato was basically just a poetic bean counter. The flute music swells. You recline a little deeper. And now the real entertainment begins. A hush falls over the room. Not silence exactly, but a reverent pause like the air just shifted. The host claps once, softly, and suddenly out of the far hallway glides a young performer dressed in saffron robes with gold-painted eyelids and a lyre slung casually over one shoulder. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His mere arrival draws everyone's attention like honey draws bees or senators to scandal. Entertainment at Roman dinner parties was never a side act. It was part of the meal, like olives or judgmental glances, music, poetry, storytelling, even shadow puppetry. If it could dazzle and keep guests from picking at each other's togas, it was welcome. Tonight's entertainment begins with a tale, Orpheus again, but this time with a twist ending and a few winks at Caesar's current affair. Light laughter follows. You catch the host trying to suppress a smirk. Well played. You recline, hands folded neatly on your stomach, letting the rhythm of the lyre settle you. It's hypnotic. Half the table looks entranced. The other half is quietly judging the performer's fingering technique. Table talk resumes in gentle waves. The subject now? Dreams. Not metaphors. Literal dreams, last night's omens, prophetic nightmares, the kind involving flaming chariots and inexplicable turnips. You mention a dream you had, something about a chariot race and losing your shoe mid-victory. A woman across from you interprets it as a sign of rising status. You thank her politely and resist the urge to check your sandals. Historians still debate how structured Roman dinner conversations really were. Some evidence suggests topics were predetermined by the host, especially if he was trying to impress someone. Other scholars argue that the symposium flowed organically, drifting between philosophy, gossip, and the occasional roast of an absent senator. What is certain is that etiquette mattered. You didn't interrupt the speaker, you didn't contradict too forcefully, and you absolutely didn't shout across couches unless it was to toast someone's clever turn of phrase. You also didn't bring up politics unless invited, and even then, tread lightly, especially when the wine had begun loosening tongues. More than one career had been undone by a poorly timed pun about the emperor's new hairstyle. As the poetry ends, applause stirs like wind through a wheat field, soft, then swelling. A dancer takes the floor now, balancing a tray of lit oil lamps on her head. You're impressed, then alarmed, then impressed again. She spins, steady as a temple column, and not a drop of oil spills. More murmurs. Someone makes a joke about training their daughter to do the same. Someone else laughs a little too hard. Finger bowls are passed around now. Simple silver dishes with warm water and rose petals. You dip your fingers delicately, trying not to splash. Then comes the napkin dance. Every guest arrives with a personal napkin, often brought from home. The trick is not to lose it. Roman napkins, especially embroidered ones, were valuable. Some were even stolen mid-dinner by particularly bold guests, or pocketed as souvenirs of a good night. You've tucked yours safely into the fold of your tunic. The guest beside you notices. Clever, he says. You nod. You've watched and learned. Servants glide in again, this time bearing incense burners. The scent of cinnamon and frankincense begins to drift over the table. It's meant to refresh the senses, clear the palate, and, let's be honest, cover the rising tang of full bellies and spilled fish sauce. The conversation shifts again, now to pets. Someone boasts of a talking parrot from Carthage. Another describes a monkey who can pour wine. The host mentions a favorite peacock who once walked into a bathhouse uninvited and refused to leave. You smile politely. You once had a cat that knocked over a vase and was never invited to anything again. A round of impromptu riddles begins. You win one by accident, your answer being both completely wrong and somehow poetic enough to charm the judges. You're offered a second cup of wine as a reward. You decline, gracefully. Survival depends on limits. The flute resumes. A man 3 couches down begins humming along badly. The performer glares. You pretend not to notice. And now the host leans forward, raises his cup, and tells a story. It's long, possibly improvised, something about Hercules, a sheep, and a lesson in moderation. It doesn't make sense exactly, but that's not the point. Everyone nods, laughs at the right moments, and offers appreciative sighs at the end. You applaud gently. The story wasn't good, but the delivery was. And in Rome, that's what mattered. There's a second performer waiting near the door, a mime, perhaps. He's dressed in white, holding a painted mask. You hope he doesn't do the silent drowning routine again. It made everyone anxious last time, but for now, the music is back, softer this time. The harpist plucks a slow, drifting rhythm that makes your eyelids heavy. The torches flicker. The conversation's quiet. The night has turned inward. People recline more deeply. Some guests have begun to whisper. Others stare at the ceiling, lost in a wine-fueled haze of roasted pine nuts and philosophical doubt. You adjust your cushion once more. The silence between harp notes is almost more soothing than the music itself. And in this moment, between dessert and departure, you realize you're content. It's late now. Not that anyone would say so aloud. Acknowledging the hour would be like admitting the sun sets or that senators sometimes lie. The dinner party continues, not because of hunger or conversation, but out of a shared, unspoken agreement. Leaving too soon is rude. Staying too long is desperate, but drifting out with style, that's Roman. You stretch subtly, fingers brushing your napkin. Around you, guests are shifting too. Some feign deep engagement with a half-eaten fig. Others pretend to listen intently to a story they've heard before, likely from the same person last week. The end of a Roman scena is like the end of a well-worn play. Everyone knows their cues. A servant approaches with a final offering, chilled wine laced with herbs like mint and thyme. Not too sweet, meant to cleanse the palate and help digestion. You sip slowly. The chill travels gently down your throat like evening mist. Now comes the round of apophoria, the parting gifts. Small tokens left at each guest's place. You find yours beneath your plate, a carved ivory comb. Delicate, likely imported. You turn it over in your hand and wonder briefly who made it. Someone far from here, surely, with a life very different from yours and a lot fewer peacock-related problems. You glance up. Across the room, others are inspecting their gifts. A miniature oil lamp, a tiny bronze figurine. One man pretends to be delighted by a jar of salted mullet eggs. He's not. But he's trying. Historians still argue whether these gifts were thoughtful, obligatory, or passive-aggressive. Some say they were signs of respect. Others argue they were subtle messages, tokens matched to a guest's recent misbehavior. You hope yours is just a comb. Your host rises. Not abruptly, just enough to indicate he's about to say something. You shift, preparing for the final toast. The harpist strikes a soft chord. "May the gods bless your journey home," the host says. A simple phrase, ancient even then. You raise your cup. Sip, nod. The candles flicker in approval. And now the departure dance begins. Guests rise slowly. Some linger. Others pretend they forgot something, usually an excuse to speak privately with someone important. You rise carefully. Your joints protest. Reclining for hours is glamorous, until it isn't. You retrieve your sandals from beneath the couch. One of them is mysteriously damp. You decide not to investigate. As you approach the exit, a servant hands you a small cloth, rose-scented, damp. You wipe your hands again, even though they're clean. Ritual is comfort. Repetition is elegance, and you're trying to appear both. You nod to the flute player, still somehow playing. He doesn't acknowledge you. He hasn't acknowledged anyone all evening. You suspect he's asleep with his eyes open. The hallway is lined with more mosaics, sea creatures, nymphs, a particularly smug-looking dolphin. You step carefully, mindful of your toga hem, mindful too of the other guests now murmuring goodbyes. Someone mentions your toast from earlier. Elegant, they say. You don't remember what you said, but you nod like you do. You're learning. The atrium glows with the last breath of torchlight. Outside, the stars are pricked across the sky like tiny silver coins scattered by a careless god. You feel the cool air against your face. After the heat of the triclinium, it's a balm, a relief. You take a long breath, and then, just before you leave, someone stumbles out behind you laughing. They whisper something about the goat cheese scandal of last spring and disappear into the shadows with a hiccup. You smile. You survived. No cushions were tripped over. No wine was spilled on senators. You even remembered to bring your own napkin home. A triumph by Roman standards. But more than that, you learned the rhythm, the subtle choreography of Roman hospitality, the art of reclining without slouching, of speaking without offending, of eating hedgehog without flinching. You learned how to exist in a space that was equal parts feast and theater, politics and poetry, elegance and eel pie. And now it's time to rest. As you step away from the mosaic floor, the harp's last notes still echo somewhere behind you, soft, distant, like a memory you're not sure you had. The stars above Rome are unmoving, eternal, and for a moment, so are you. You take one more breath of night air, feeling the city's pulse slow beneath your feet. The hum of the dinner party fades. The scent of roasted spices lingers in your clothes. But it's no longer sharp. It's soft now, warm, comforting, like the end of a very long, very strange, very human dream. You don't remember the last thing you said, or the final taste on your tongue, but that's all right. These nights aren't meant to be remembered perfectly. They're meant to blur into something smooth, something warm, something worth closing your eyes for. So you walk a little slower. Let the wine settle. Let the laughter drift away. Let the lamplight fade from your eyes like the final flicker of a story well told. Because tonight you've dined in the heart of empire. You've leaned into history. You've seen the world of peacock tongues and philosophy debates, of silent servers and golden goblets, and now all that's left is sleep. Let it take you gently. Let it hold you like the quiet rustle of silk on stone, and let your dreams be filled with lyres, low cushions, and just the faintest scent of honeyed almonds.